About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller. I'm a longtime student of consciousness studies, cybernetics, and anthropology, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, in the world of medicine and psychology, consciousness is defined as being awake and aware, knowing what's going on around us. In the field of noetics, though, consciousness is much more. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's the profound human experiences that shape our lives. And ultimately, consciousness is what connects us all. So far in this series, we've looked at a number of models of what consciousness is. We started with those first scientific examinations of it with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung from the early 20th century, explaining how much of what goes on in the mind is not in our normal awareness. It is, in fact, unconscious. We went on to Charles Tart's 1960s descriptions of the various states of consciousness that we might be in. And we talked about Julian Jaynes, who related consciousness to the separation of the right and left hemispheres of our brain. We went on beyond that to look at some of the field models of mind that have been developed by Rupert Sheldrake, Kurt Levine, and others, trying to explain how it is that mind affects and is affected by the body and other things faster than nerve signals can travel. Which brought us, of course, to how quantum mechanics relates to consciousness, and we looked at the work of David Bohm, Dana Zohar, and Omid Goswami to explore that. We then looked at the global brain. If quantum mechanics and consciousness are related, then there is some field beyond the individual. And Peter Russell called it the global brain. Teilhard de Chardin called it the noosphere. And Ervin Laszlo is calling it the Akashic field or the quantum field. And the discipline of transpersonal psychology was our next exploration, applying some of these understandings in therapy and research. We then looked at the work of Bruce Lipton and Candace Pert, who described how our hormones can act as what they call molecules of emotions, leading to a biology that's based on our beliefs, our thoughts, and our feelings. And that led us into what is increasingly called coherence, a state of consciousness in which heart, mind, and emotions are all in alignment. We looked at some of the experimental results supporting these new ideas about consciousness, including looking at ways that people are communicating telepathically and they're moving matter with mind action and ultimately are being able to see through what we're now calling remote viewing and what used to be called clairvoyance, things that the eyes cannot perceive. As we looked at that, we began to understand that the different states of consciousness we operate in every day determine the extent to which we can have some of these experiences and understandings. And we explored frequencies and how we can move into higher and lower frequencies of vibration patterns in the brain and the heart using the work of Penny Pierce, the study of cymatics, and the water crystal experiments of Masaru Emoto, among others. In the last few sections, we've been looking at the healing process and the role that consciousness and what are felt as energy flows play in the body's response to threats and other forms of distress. You can catch up on those past shows on the KXCR.net archives. When you're on that site, KXCR.net, click on the little cloud that's up in the banner at the top of the screen. And you can catch up on them on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to all the books and clips and authors that I mentioned during the show. Now today we're going to look in more detail at the effects of changing our state of consciousness and the pattern of thought, feeling, and action associated with that state of consciousness on the body. A couple weeks back, I shared how I was able to turn around what appeared to be a terminal condition primarily by learning how to change the state of consciousness I was living in, from one that was toxic to the cells and organ functions to one in which the body could heal itself. And now the research is catching up to my experience. I'll let neurophysiologist Carolyn Leaf explain.
When you're talking about quantum physics and gravitational fields, there's a lot of interaction that occurs. But what the science seems to show is that it's kind of almost how, like around us, but it interacts because everyone's got this field and then we live in gravitational fields. So everything around you is a gravitational field. So everything's interacting. And so that's why, when you come up to someone, an example would be like that electrostatic shock. When when you brush past someone, you get that. And on a more psychological level, you can experience that field is like maybe you're in a really great mood, and then you get into a conversation with some friends and they're so totally depressed, and you come away from there thinking, I feel awful, I need to go and have a shower. You feel so... So their field has interacted with yours and impacted you because that field is coming from your mind, which then uses the brain and converts what you're experiencing into these thoughts. And then these thoughts are generating, there's this whole relationship and there's this back and forth. And this literally is photons. Einstein showed us that we're literally generating from our thoughts as we talk from our thoughts, that you can't talk without thoughts. You build thoughts and then your actions and behaviors and communication come from the thoughts. So this would generate healthy, it's a nice healthy green tree, and here's a toxic one. So this would be a toxic, the depression or whatever, being negative or whatever. That would generate toxic photons. And these are the ones that would make you, you feel it. You feel that negativity. This is a sense of you're around a happy person and you just feel like amazing, And so it's very real. This is not some ethereal thing. We're talking about the non-physical sciences of quantum physics, but it's real. And there's an impact and an effect, and we can control it. That's the interesting thing.
So our mind is a field in which our thoughts affect our bodies, and the fields around us affect us. This neurophysiologist understands that the mind is a field, and that the field is affecting the body, and that thoughts directly affect the body, and that the body that is being affected may not just be our own, but may be the bodies of those around us. All of which totally is supported by the work that we've been looking at so far. Now, if the mind is a field, and if thoughts affect the body, and if the state of consciousness can be conceived of as part of the condition that we call illness or distress, then changing the state of consciousness is what we need to do to heal the body. A lot of what Carolyn offers in her various books, and I'll review one here shortly, Carolyn offers a very powerful method for getting reoriented in the body, in the mind, so that the distressing effects of what's going on in the mind no longer impact the body, the brain, or the body as a whole. Another person that's been doing some powerful work in this area is Joe Dispenza, who has been leading workshops and done a series of books on the process of breaking the habit, that is, the state of consciousness that we're accustomed to living in. So I'm going to let him talk about that here.
And you say to the person, hey, Mark, what thoughts do you want to fire and wire in your brain? And with intention and attention, if we showed you how to do that, nerve cells that fire together, wire together. Just take a little repetition, a little presence, you start installing the hardware. Keep doing it. It's going to become a software program. What does that mean? That's going to be the new voice in your head that says, Mark, you can do it. But if you said then, okay, how am I going to be with my coworkers? How am I going to be with my employees? How am I going to be with my ex-wife? What would greatness look like today? And you sat down and closed your eyes and you rehearsed in your mind how you were going to be in every one of those situations. If you study the research in neuroscience, mental rehearsal installs neurological hardware in your brain to look like you already did it.
Yeah, that's when I think about my serve before I serve, and I do it better.
Of course, because you produce that mind. So if you keep doing that, you install hardware, practice it and rehearse it. It becomes a software program, which means you start behaving that way. Now, here's the challenging part. Can you teach your body emotionally what the future reality that you want to live in feels like before it happens? Now, this is very difficult if you've been conditioned into believing something in your outer world has to change to take away the emptiness or the lack, to make you feel differently. This is saying, actually feel the emotion before it happens and don't wait for the experience to occur. Teach your body what the feeling will be before it occurs. If the environment signals the gene and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment, and genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body, and the expression of proteins is the expression of life. So teach the body emotionally to self-regulate, to believe it's living in an environment that's flourishing, that's wonderful. Keep practicing it, and it'll become familiar to you. And the process then creates a new identity, and it's not difficult once you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And the more you combine all those different branches of science and make it in a simple way to understand, if people understand the what and the why, the how gets easier because you can assign meaning to what you're doing and it becomes instrumental. So get a group of people, 1,000 people, 1,500 people, 2,000 people into a room, teach them that information, whether they're coming for wealth or health, a relationship, a new career, a mystical experience. Get them all together and teach them and measure what can take place in a 1 week period of time. And I assure you, that's more than 75% of the people that go through and go all in and retreat from their lives and remove the same stimulation from their environment and not be in the same conditions, and teach them that information and give them numerous opportunities to apply it and numerous opportunities to get beyond themselves. All you need is that first person that stands on the stage and says, hey, I walked in here with Parkinson's disease. I have no idea what happened, but I'm not trembling anymore. And boy, that last thing, just something clicked for me. And the person in the audience was watching the 4-minute mile right in front of them and going, wow, that guy looks like he's not a vegan. He doesn't look like he's particularly in shape, but his Parkinson's went away. And wow, I mean, if he could do it, I could do it. And somebody else changes their belief. And now that's a footprint in consciousness. Get enough people doing that. By the end of the week, you're going to see things. We've seen blind people seeing, deaf people hearing, not once, not twice.
Really?
We've seen people with strokes for 10 years lift their arms up again. We've seen people step out of wheelchairs, people on crutches, drop their crutches. I mean, you see the body literally recalibrates to a new mind. And they're not intentionally trying to do anything. They're just becoming somebody else. But the process of overcoming is the process of becoming. And if you teach people that formula.
All right. We shift from the state of consciousness that contributed to the distress by letting go of, overcoming the beliefs about the situation we're in, about our past, and beginning to experience through imagination, through the words of others, through observing the experiences of others, the possibility of a different state of being. And as we enter into that different state of being, the body responds in various ways, various kinds, various forms of healing, of being well. Now, it works both directions. If you hang out with people who aren't well and you buy into that set of beliefs, you move in that direction. But if you give yourself an experience of days, weeks, working with, being in the presence of, focusing on the idea of being well and active and involved and healed and whole, the consciousness drives the body to become that. And that's the essence of virtually all healing modes. It really doesn't matter what method we're using, right? We're changing a state of consciousness if we're taking a medication, or if a doctor hands us a placebo and we think it's a medication. 30 to 50% of cases are healed because we think it's the medication. There was an experiment done with knee surgery. A power outage caused a surgeon to have to close someone up in the middle of a knee surgery, actually the beginning. He hadn't done anything, but he had opened up the knee and had to close it up. And the man woke up in recovery not knowing that that was what was happening, and was very grateful to the doctor for fixing his knee. And so the doctor began a series of experiments, and it turned out it was the belief that the work had been done that led to the experience of the healed knee. Isn't that interesting? So both Carolyn Leaf and Joe Dispenza have developed methods to help people get out of the mindset in which the distress is happening and into a state of consciousness in which the body can experience wholeness and well-being. And that is the relationship between consciousness and healing. Which brings me to the book I want to talk about today. I don't very often do this, but this is another one that I produced. It's called The Creative Power of Thought, Thomas Troward's Metaphysics. Now, people who have studied in religious science are familiar with Thomas Troward, sort of. He did a number of marvelous things back in the turn of the last century, and if you listened to my show last week, you heard a little bit about it. This is in part of my Library of Hidden Knowledge, where I took original essays by various philosophers of the 19th and earliest 20th century and wrote them in, or edited them, or abridged them, whatever you want to say, into a form that is more readable for 21st century readers. And in the Library of Hidden Knowledge, the back half of the book is always the original text. So you can go back and forth, you can do the exercises that I provide, etc. This is the book on Thomas Troward. My section 6 is healing, and it's from his book, The Hidden Power and Other Papers on Mental Science, which his wife put together after he had passed away. He says, the subject of healing has been elaborately treated by many writers and fully deserves all the attention that's been given to it. But our goal is to ground the reader in those general principles that underlie the conscious use of the creative power of thought. He points out, the principle stated by all mental healers is that the appearance of illness is based in a belief, and the basis of all healing is a change in belief. Now, what he is calling belief, I'm calling state of consciousness, because each state of consciousness includes a whole set of beliefs, thoughts, and feelings. Some people may be aware that in the cases of what we have in the past called multiple personality disorder, some personalities have bodies that have incurable diseases, and yet the other personality, with all of its beliefs and assumptions, does not show that in the same body. Those kinds of experiences underlie and support these theories and these ideas and these practices. So he says the sequence from which this understanding results is as follows. The objective aware mind impresses its thought upon the subjective subconscious mind. The subconscious or subjective mind is the creative faculty within us and creates in the body and environment whatever thought is imposed upon it. The thought is the expression of the belief. This means that whatever the subjective mind creates is the external representation of our beliefs, of the state of consciousness, of the combination of thoughts, feelings, memories, ideas, assumptions, and knowings that we carry around. So he says, accordingly, our whole object in healing is to change those beliefs. He says that illness results from the belief that some material form or substance is a primary cause or entity that can cause disease or distress. And then he goes on and says, your true or absolute self, that consciousness in us that is present everywhere, is therefore not subject to illness. Now, because the subconscious mind is directly linked with that consciousness that is universal and accepts whatever it is told precisely as it is presented, it must externalize in our lives and world any idea that is firmly impressed upon it. So then he suggests that what is needed to do to undo the old belief and come up with a new one. The new belief in one's own creative faculty must penetrate down to the innermost depths of the subconscious mind. He says elsewhere in these lectures, I pointed out the difference between placing an idea in the subconscious mind, that is, without reference to time and space, and placing the same idea in the conscious, aware, intellectual mind, which only perceives as related to time and space. He says, a way to know that you are working on the deeper level of mind is to experience in yourself the limitless state immediately before, during, or taking action. So this is very much related to the state of being that Joe Dispenza was describing that he helps people accomplish in the workshops that he has set up. He also points out that this is a mutual process. The healer and the patient put themselves in a receptive mental attitude in order to remove or reduce the barrier between them. Then, Troward says, by the joint action of the two minds, the barriers of both personalities are removed and the direction of flow of intention is determined. It flows from the healing mind as actively willing to give toward the patient's mind as passively willing to receive. They thus follow the consistent law of nature that the flow must always be from the fullness to the emptiness. So, Thomas Troward lays out the process and an understanding for how it is that someone in one state of consciousness can affect the state of consciousness of another person such that that person can either immediately, if the rapport is strong enough and the knowing is deep enough, or over time have the symptoms of distress that they've been dealing with be reduced or eliminated. Well, if you've just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR 90.7 on the FM dial and streaming on KXCR.net. And that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today. It turns out that there's a marvelous new article coming out. It's on Science Alert. If you haven't found that website, it's a fun website, sciencealert.com. And this is a group of psychologists and physiologists working out of Northumbria University in the UK and out of Durham University in the UK. And they're talking to people who are saying that they can hear the voices of people who have passed on, the voices of the dead. They've done a survey of 65 mediums who declare themselves clairaudient and 143 members of the general population that were recruited through social media to determine what difference there is, what makes a spiritualist, someone who believes they can hear the voices of the dead, different from the rest of us. Overall, they found that almost half of the spiritualists reported hearing voices daily, and 79% said those experiences were, in fact, part of their daily lives. While most reported hearing the voices inside their head, like telepathy or some kind of knowing, over 30% reported that they heard the voices externally. Compared to the general population, these people had a much higher belief in paranormal and were less likely to care what other people thought of them. And most of them had them fairly young, the average age of about 22 years, and they were able to experience what's called absorption. That is immersion in mental tasks. If you read and find yourself totally absorbed in the book, or you're doing some intense creative work, or you're working with numbers and you're totally unaware of what's going on around you, that's what's called absorption. And they're also able to enter into altered states and not be aware of what's going on around them. Altered states of consciousness. Remember Charles Tart and his original work on altered and discrete states of consciousness. So they're good at tuning out the world around them. In addition, they reported that they were more prone to having daydreams and other forms of vision. Most of those, however, said they hadn't heard of mediums or spiritualism prior to having these experiences. They had come across it trying to find answers for their experiences. In the general population, by contrast, they could often be highly absorbed, and those who were also had a high belief in the paranormal, but the general population didn't show up with this capability of hearing the dead. All right, well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience a very different kind of life when we use our current state of consciousness more fully and completely. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org. where there is a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show next to each archived past show, and where you can send me your comments and questions, and I will do my best to get those answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.